Pay for the report, for instance? Did PolyMet pay for the report?
Yeah. Under our environmental review regulations, PolyMet does have to reimburse the state for reasonable costs in producing the document. So they pay for staff time and they pay for our contractor who's helping us to produce this document. So we work independently and we recoup our costs from PolyMet.
Stuart Arkley, is that right?
That's correct.
Stuart, what are you to the report? Are you sort of its coordinator?
I'm the project manager, which means I kind of have a very broad position in producing the document, coordinating technical teams. We have a huge number of technical staff working on this, plus our contractor, and so I help to keep these teams moving on schedule.
How many people do you think have worked on it?
We have a core team of maybe 25 people or so, plus the contractor. And then
I've looked at it. I have it on my hard drive at home, and I've spent many hours with it. It's roughly, what, 1,500 pages or more that I have seen published, and I imagine you have many more behind it sitting on your hard drives also.
Right. It's about 1,500 to 1,700 pages, including the appendix material. There are many background documents, probably something in the order of 300 memos and technical reports that we've used.
When did we start digging into this report? Was this how many years ago? It looks 5 years or more?
Started, the draft EIS preparation started early in 2006. We finished.
Oh, really? Well, that's rather rapid then.
Yeah, we finished scoping at the end of 2005. The scoping process took in the order of 6 months to complete, and that the scoping process is what gives us a blueprint for what needs to be in the document. And then from early 2006 onwards through November 2009, we evaluated all that information, compiled it into draft EIS chapters, and that resulted in the document you see today.
Well, I can tell you that it's pretty fascinating, actually. And I was a water quality person, having bred many fish and simulated the Amazon environment with 35 aquariums after school. So it got into me. And I think that this is an interesting area, too, which is a lot like the Amazon basin. You actually have very few buffers up there, very soft water. So you can influence the water chemistry very quickly when you introduce new things into it. Go ahead, what do you want to say?
Well, you know, this isn't an area that's already impacted by mining activity.
Right.
So one of the important things we do in a draft EIS is to assess the existing conditions, and then we layer on top of that what would happen if the project went forward.
What is this mine just north of the project that we're looking at? Is it the Peterman mine? Is that correct?
Peter Mitchell mine.
Peter Mitchell.
Owned by North Shore Mining Company.
Have we looked at its impact very closely then in this report?
There's some interaction with the drawdown in the Peter Mitchell pit, with how that impacts the flow in the Partridge River. We have looked at that to the extent that records are available. So there's some consideration of the interaction of
do we have very similar rock at Peter Mitchell?
Peter Mitchell is a taconite mine, so that's in a different ore body. It's not a sulfide mine ore body, so chemically there really isn't an interaction, but in terms of the quantity of water going through the Partridge River, then there is an interaction.
Do we have other mines up there that are exposed to sulfur or exposing sulfur?
This PolyMet project would be the first mine of its kind in the state. The first copper nickel mine, the first sulfide mine, which means that the ore body is rock that contains sulfide minerals.
I've looked a bit at the Flandreau mine. Do you think of that as an example that we should look for at Ladysmith in Wisconsin? Have you looked at that at all?
We've looked at that. We've looked at a lot of different mines.
Very different rock? Go ahead. It's a different kind of rock, but really every project is unique. Individual.
The rock, the location, the climate. So we look at every project individually in its context, and with this one, it's already in an impacted mine area, so that's also different.
You're not really looking out 20 years with this project, are you? You're looking out perhaps hundreds or thousands of years in water quality, aren't you?
We really have to consider that there are some potentially long-term water quality impacts from this kind of mining. So it's important the project is designed to meet environmental standards, and that adequate reclamation is conducted to make sure that the mine is closed properly and continue to meet water quality standards.
Our life cycle is thought to be, what, less than 20 years for this mine, I think, roughly?
The operating life cycle of mine is predicted to be about 20 years. And then we'd be looking at about 40 years of closure activity as the mine begins to fill with water.
Well, thanks very much. I think we've...
It can still be a public meeting with public words. What are we doing? Let's talk.
Listen to what was said at the beginning.
Hello again.
We did listen.
The purpose of the next talk here is to give a brief overview of the environmental review process.
These guys get a stage and a microphone. Why don't I get one? Why doesn't the opposition get one? Let me grab my stuff. Okay, all right.
The first thing I'd like to do is introduce some of the key members of our NorthMet Environmental Impact Statement team. Stuart Arkley, who's the lead for the Department of Natural Resources in the EIS.
Hold on.
John Alness from the Corps of Engineers, who is the federal lead. And Al Triple from Environmental Resource Management, and that's the firm that is working with the DNR and the Corps in writing the environmental impact statement. The first thing I'd like to do is briefly go over the purpose of environmental review. Broadly, the process, including preparation of environmental impact statements, is intended to do a number of things. First and foremost, it's a process to assess potential environmental effects of proposed development activities. Through environmental review, we can provide environmental information to decision makers down the line, the folks who have to write the permits and other sorts of approvals later on. We can examine project alternatives. And last, and this is not least, we provide this information to the public and provide the public an opportunity for input or feedback on the environmental review documents. And EIS helps us in several ways. It helps decision makers to understand the environmental impacts of a proposed project through the preparation and public review of the environmental documents. It takes a hard look at the project for potentially significant impacts using the best available data. And here I'd like to note that it's a tool to support decision making. It's not intended to be a research project. And EIS also explores ways to avoid, minimize, or mitigate potential environmental impacts through alternative sites, alternative designs, alternative technologies and practices, and also through mitigative actions. The public, through the process, gets early access to decision makers on a proposed project in a number of ways. For this project, we had a public comment period and a public meeting in conjunction with the scoping process a few years ago. We are in the midst right now of the public notice period and public comment period with the public meetings tonight for the draft environmental impact statement. And then there will be another public comment period when the final environmental impact statement comes out. And finally, this leads to better decisions because final permits and approvals are not allowed to be issued until after environmental review process is complete, and those permit decisions must take the findings of the environmental review or the EIS into account. Now there are some things an environmental impact statement does not do. It's not a regulatory document, it's an information document, so it will not approve or deny a project. Completion of an environmental impact statement does not guarantee that permits will be issued. Permits go through their own review and evaluation procedures, and those approvals occur afterwards, as I've said before. An EIS will not analyze every conceivable impact. The focus is on potentially significant impacts. The scoping process I mentioned in the previous slide is what we use to create the blueprint for the environmental impact statement. It won't answer every single question folks might have. And it's also intended to be an analytical document, not an encyclopedic document. So now I'll turn for a moment to, specifically to the NorthMet Environmental Impact Statement. The EIS scoping period was completed in October of 2005. After that, work commenced on the draft EIS, which the DNR published for public review on November 2nd, and Army Corps of Engineers published on the federal side on November 6th. We're currently in the public review process. The comment period extends to February 3rd of 2010, and we're having public meetings tonight, and then we had one last night in Aurora as required by state regulations. The next step after the draft EIS is to produce a final environmental impact statement. The time frame for that is going to depend on the number and complexity of the draft EIS comments and on how much revision is needed to the EIS between draft and final. In the state process, the very last step in environmental review is to determine that the EIS is complete, or adequate, excuse me, that it's met all of the state's environmental review requirements. This is not an approval of the project. That comes in the regulatory processes that follow. The Corps, the final step for the Corps is the record of decision. That is a regulatory determination on the Corps' wetlands permit. You've already heard how the ways in which you can comment tonight. We also, as I said, the comment period is open through February 3rd, and so there are many ways you can comment between now and then. You can write a letter to DNR and/or the Corps of Engineers, and for all of these things, if you comment to one of us, we're both receiving it, so you don't have to send the comment to the DNR and to the Corps for it to count. One or the other is good enough. You can send your comments via email. Now, I know the DNR's email site, we were having a little trouble with our email. That's associated with a statewide email conversion thing, but I understand that's been fixed as of late this afternoon. You can also fax your comments. As I said, they're due February 3rd at the latest, and we ask that you include your name and city when you send your comments in. Specific information, the addresses, email addresses, phone, fax numbers, that sort of stuff, on where to send comments was included in that agenda and handout that you received at the door tonight. A couple of thoughts on commenting. The Environmental Quality Board is the state agency that oversees Minnesota's environmental review process. I've pulled a few suggestions from a publication they've done that offers guidance to citizens commenting on environmental review. Some of the EQB recommendations for comments include that they be clear, concise, and factual, that they identify topics needing more information or better analysis, offer suggestions for other analyses, other alternatives that don't appear in the EIS, modifications to the project, or maybe modifications to mitigation or other mitigation that you don't see. Identify things that you think might be errors in impact predictions or errors in models or assumptions that are used to predict impacts, and identify possible solutions. Now, the particular document I'm referring to is available. Copies of that are available on EQB's website using the link on the handout that you were given at the door this evening. So what happens to your comments? At the end of the comment period, we examine and consider all comments received, including those we received tonight and including those we received last night. Some of the comments we received can result in collecting additional information, conducting more analyses, or they can result in changes to the environmental impact statement. Not all comments result in a change to the EIS though, but we do carefully consider and evaluate all the comments even if they don't result in modification. The final EIS includes responses to comments that we receive on the draft EIS. So we will respond to your comments. Now, on a project like this where we're anticipating a very large volume of comments, what we do is we don't respond to them individually. We group them by theme and then we respond to the comments as a group in that manner. And then just to close the loop, information from the final EIS, including any changes to it that occurred as a result of comments, are then used by project decision makers to help inform the regulatory decisions. So that's it for my short primer on the environmental review process. Further information and questions, you can contact EIS leads Stuart Arkley or John Olness. And information on the EIS is also available on DNR's website at the link on the screen. That's it for my talk. What I'm going to do now is introduce Al Triple and invite Al to come up. He's from ERM again, DNR and Corps' consultant for preparation of the NorthMet EIS. Al's going to provide an overview of the project and the draft EIS.
Thank you very much and welcome. Again, my name is Al Triple. I'm with ERM. It's a third-party consulting firm hired by the state, and our task is to help the state analyze the environmental impacts that would be from this project and help them write the draft EIS document. What I'd like to do is cover 3 topics tonight. I'd like to first go over the outline or the layout or the contents or the structure of the draft EIS document itself, and then talk about what is the project as it's proposed by PolyMet, what does it consist of, and what would be the predicted effects of that, environmental, socioeconomic, cultural, etc. And then to talk about several alternatives that were evaluated to compare against the project as proposed by PolyMet and what would be the effects of those alternatives. So as far as the layout or the content of the draft EIS document, it's the best explanation or summary of what's in it is the table of contents. That's a real good roadmap of all the different sections. It's actually been produced in 2 different documents. One is a standalone summary document and a complete draft EIS document that's in 3 volumes, including the text and tables in 1 volume, figures in a 2nd volume, and a series of appendices in the 3rd volume. The standalone summary document is also in the first part of the three volume set. And then the major elements within the draft EIS document include the description of the project and alternatives to the project, the existing conditions at the site, the environmental consequences that are predicted for the project and the alternatives, as well as the cumulative effects, and then there's a section that compares the effects of one alternative to another. Now, as far as the project as it's proposed by PolyMet, the location of it is at the east end of the Iron Range. It's in St. Louis County. It's between the cities of Hoyt Lakes and Babbitt, and it's within the St. Louis River watershed. This map, for scale or location, to find where the site is, here's Duluth down at the bottom of the map. Here's the North Shore, Lake Superior. Up here is the Boundary Water Canoe Area Wilderness, Voyager National Park. This area through here is the Iron Range with all of the existing and historic iron mining. And the area right in here at the east end of the Iron Range is the location of the project. This would be a new surface mine for copper, nickel, and platinum group elements. It's a metallic ore, and generally this kind of ore contains sulfur or sulfide minerals, which may generate acid rock drainage. The mine life cycle would consist of a construction period, 20 years of operations, closure and reclamation, followed by a post-closure period after that. So there's kind of 4 segments of activities over a period of time. Now the main components of the project as it's proposed are 3. There's the mine site itself, there's the transportation corridor, and there's the plant site or the mill site. Now this map shows the various features of the site. For reference, these little squares are square miles. Down here is Hoyt Lakes, Aurora, and up at the top is Babbitt. And you can see on the right side in the center here is the proposed mine site. This is currently an undisturbed site. It's a greenfield site. There's the plant site off here to the west, which is an existing inactive taconite mill and tailings basin. And then connecting the two are transportation corridor. There's also 2 rivers, the Partridge River that comes down here and the Embarrass River that comes around here. We'll mention those in a little bit. A little more detail about the mine site itself. First of all, there's a U.S. Forest Service property transfer that's in progress where the surface lands would be transferred in ownership from the Forest Service to PolyMet. They would become private land. And the draft EIS document evaluates the impacts of the project and alternatives, assuming that that transfer will be done. Now also at the mine site are proposed pits, the east pit and the west pit. There would be on-site waste rock management of 2 different kinds. There would be a backfilling of the east pit with low sulfur waste rock, and as it's proposed, several surface stockpiles of higher sulfur waste rock that would be lined and capped. And the project as it's proposed would consist of concurrent reclamation during the life of the mining and final reclamation at the end of it. A little more detail of the mine site itself. For scale, these squares here are a square mile. This blue line here is the Partridge River. These bright yellow areas are the pits. There's the east pit, central pit, and west pit. Central pit actually coalesces and becomes the east pit after a number of years. Surrounding, and as I mentioned, what's proposed by PolyMet is to backfill the east pit area with the low sulfur rock, waste rock. And the surface stockpiles are shown adjacent to the pits. You can see a little bit of the transportation corridor starting here, and it would travel off to the west to the mine site or the plant site area. Now that transportation corridor consists of an existing road, an existing railroad, and existing power lines, and would consist of a new water pipeline from the mine to the plant. Now the plant site itself would be to refurbish an existing or brownfield taconite plant. It would consist of, as proposed, about 32,000 tons per day of processing of the ore. That processing would include crushing and grinding and flotation and those are existing facilities, and then a new hydrometallurgical facility which would further separate the metallic minerals from the flotation concentrate, followed by rail car transport of the final products for sale off-site. Also at the plant site is the existing tailings basin. What's proposed by PolyMet is to use that tailings basin for the new tailings in an unlined new tailings facility on top of the old, limiting the footprint. Also at the existing tailings basin are proposed new residue storage cells which will be lined and capped and house residue from the milling process as well. Now this map, for scale, this feature here is about 2 miles across. This is the existing processing plant that would be refurbished in order to treat this copper nickel ore. And here's the existing tailings basin. The North Met tailings would be stored on top of the east half of this tailings basin. The Hydromet residues would be stored on the west half, southwest corner of that. So that's the description of the project as it's proposed by PolyMet. The draft EIS document and the EIS process then evaluates predicted effects from that project for a number of resources, environmental resources as well as cultural and socioeconomic resources. Now, some of the effects that were identified and are described in the draft EIS document include, for the mine site, that the proposed stockpile leachate, the surface stockpiles, the leachate is predicted to exceed groundwater standards. Also, that the west pit, which would not be backfilled with rock, but would be filled with groundwater afterwards, would become a lake and would actually overtop a little bit with a small amount of flow. That overflow may not initially meet surface water quality discharge standards. And that there would be a reduction in the flow of the lower Partridge River near the mine site area. Also that there would be direct and indirect wetland impacts of about 1,200 acres. And that there would be a potential loss of tribal access to the current Forest Service land when it becomes private land. Now, over at the tailings basin, the effects that were identified include indirect impacts to about 350 acres of wetlands. It was found there's the potential to form methyl mercury in the wetlands, which is sort of enhanced by seepage from the tailings, that unlined proposed tailings basin, that would contain sulfate in the water, which can enhance the occurrence of methyl mercury. And methyl mercury is a bioavailable form of mercury that can affect fish and other things that eat fish. It was also found that at the tailings basin there's the potential to affect waters that contain wild rice because of that same seepage with sulfate in it. It was also found that there would be some increases in flow to the Embarrass River, and it was found that there would be a low margin of safety of the embankments, the dams of the new tailings facility built on top of the old one. Now overall, the entire project would have increases in socioeconomic benefits, including increases in employment, both direct jobs at the mine as well as additional jobs that result from those, and tax revenues, and a host of other economic and social impacts. And these are all described in the draft EIS document, and these are about the project as proposed by PolyMet. Now the EIS process, both state and federal, this is a joint state and federal agency EIS, and both processes require that for impacts or effects that are identified for the project as it's proposed, that there be alternatives to that also evaluated, with the intent of trying to reduce those predicted effects or those impacts. So what I'd like to do now is kind of go through those. The reason for doing the alternatives also is because, in this case, the project as it's proposed has the potential for several significant adverse impacts. So the DNR, the Army Corps of Engineers and other cooperating agencies developed these alternatives, and with the intention of reducing the impacts. There's two major alternatives that I'd like to touch on. First of all, in the document we talk about the mine site alternative. This is to address the water quality issues identified there. What's described or proposed for this alternative is to backfill the east pit with the higher sulfur rock, rather than, as proposed by PolyMet, would be the lower sulfide rock. The importance of this is that the higher sulfide rock has the higher potential to leach constituents. It was not found that it would generate acid, not acid rock drainage, but neutral water with some dissolved constituents in it. Putting the higher sulfur rock underground and back underground water would stop those reactions and that would form that kind of leachate. This alternative would also result in surface storage of only, therefore, the lower sulfur rock. Now this figure shows pits again here. This east pit would be backfilled with the higher sulfur rock, and these surface facilities would be the lower. Now the effects that were identified and are described in the draft DEIS document about this mine site alternative relative to the impacts that were identified for the project as proposed include that there's an improvement in the groundwater quality, or a lesser impact. There would be a small reduction in the wetlands and vegetation impacts. There would actually be less surface stockpile footprints. Over at the tailings basin, in order to address the water quality and the geotechnical stability questions, an alternative was prepared and analyzed and found that, again, what this alternative would consist of would be installing a series of wells around the outer perimeter of the existing tailings basin and the new one to capture the seepage and pump it back into the tailings basin for reuse back into the process, for beneficial reuse, or to discharge to the Partridge River. The alternative also consists of using additional rock buttress material to strengthen or enhance the embankments. And it includes capping the embankments and the beach areas to further reduce water quality effects. So here's the existing plant, again. Here's the existing tailings facility. The North Met tailings would be stored here. And this yellow line across the northern side is the location of the evaluated groundwater and seepage pumping wells. The reason they're placed or proposed to be on this side is that for this unlined facility, water seeps through it, hits the groundwater, and flows northward or upward on this map and into wetlands. So the wells would be placed in that down gradient edge. That's also the edge that would be strengthened with more rock to improve the stability of the embankments. The embankments themselves and the beach areas would also be capped. Now the changes in the effects that are identified for this alternative relative to the project as proposed include that it would reduce the amount of indirect wetland impact. It would also reduce the potential to form methylmercury in the wetlands because the sulfate in seepage would not be reaching those wetlands. And it would reduce the potential to affect waters that contain wild rice within the Embarrass River. However, it may actually increase the potential for that to occur in the Partridge River. Also, it was found that this alternative would have minimal change to the effects on the Embarrass River flow, and that the rock material would increase the embankment stability. Now, in the EIS process, and in this draft EIS document for the North Met project, there are a number of mitigation measures that were identified. What these are ways to further or additionally avoid, minimize, or mitigate impacts of the project as it's proposed or those alternatives. So these mitigation measures are ways to deal with uncertainties or residual effects even of the mine site alternative and the tailings basin alternative. These mitigation measures were identified both during scoping at the beginning of the EIS process and throughout the preparation of the draft EIS. As predicted impacts were identified, mitigation measures were also identified. Now, some examples of these include over at the mine site to address groundwater quality, to enhance stockpile liners and caps, and to add lime. For the West Pit Lake overflow, to provide in-pit water quality treatment during the flooding of that with water. At the tailings basin, mitigation measures including providing treatment for the Partridge River discharge and residual groundwater seepage if needed. Regarding wetlands, would be to provide required wetland mitigation, restoration at other sites. And for cultural resources, PolyMet intends to offset the loss of tribal access by a land exchange that would be within the 1854 treaty ceded territory. So we've talked about the project as proposed by PolyMet. We've talked about two alternatives that the agencies evaluated to reduce the effects that are predicted for the project as is proposed, and mitigation measures that would minimize the effects even more. Also in the EIS process, both state and federal, and in this NorthMet draft EIS, we're required to look at other alternatives and describe them just for comparison's sake. One of those is the so-called no-action alternative. That would be where the NorthMet project and its environmental effects and its socioeconomic effects or benefits would not occur. And for the tailings, for the plant area and the tailings basin, which are existing but inactive, there would be a continuation of the existing closure and reclamation program. Now, there are many other alternatives that are also considered throughout the EIS process, some required by regulation, some identified as good ideas to consider during the EIS process to minimize impacts on the project as it was proposed. And the goal of those is to find whether they would reduce impacts further. And in this case, we list many of them in the draft EIS, and they were found to not result in environmental benefits that would be different or better than the alternatives that we, mine site alternative and tailings basin alternative. Now, the draft EIS also talks about cumulative effects, which are predictions of what the effects of the project as is proposed by PolyMet, or the mine site alternative, or the tailings basin alternative would be when added to the effects of other projects in the region. Well, in an additive or cumulative sense, what would they be? And it was found, among others, that there would be an increase in regional air emissions. There would be minimal effects on the hydrology and water quality of the St. Louis River Basin. And there'd be a cumulative loss of wildlife habitat and travel corridors. So that's the overview of the NorthMet draft EIS document. And we've talked about what the document consists of or how it's organized or laid out. Project as is proposed by PolyMet and what would be the effects of that, as well as other alternatives and what would be the effects of those, and additional mitigation measures that would further reduce some of the potential impacts or uncertainties surrounding those alternatives. In the rest of the EIS process, we'll continue to further refine this analysis and respond to public comments and so forth. And in the EIS process, it's not clear at this moment which of these proposed project or alternatives or some combination or other would be the design that enters into the permitting process. That'll be decided later. At any rate, I hope this is helpful in helping you understand what the project would be and some of the effects. And more details about this are available, of course, in the draft DEIS document as well as at any of the information stations out front there. Thank you very much.